Good evening. We are going to commence. We have one committee member who's having some trouble logging on, but we're working through it. Today is February the 16th. This is the Budget Committee, and tonight is Public Delegation Night. Thank you for those in attendance. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets?
We have no regrets this evening.
Okay. Committee, do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. We have no consent items, and we have no confidential consent items for today. And so we move to discussion items 5.1 and the registered delegations. Madam Clerk, who is the first delegate?
Our first delegate this evening is Hart Jansen.
Mr. Jansen, we look forward to hearing from you. And I understand you have a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity to delegate. You can move to the next slide. You received an excellent delegation on Tuesday morning from Ron McKee, and I share Ron's concern that we're not doing enough on efforts to reduce community emissions. My delegation could be seen as a follow-on to that one. And so even though the town is one participant among many on the Oakville Energy Task Force, I would suggest, due to circumstance, that the town, at least for now, is the leading participant. The town's involvement in developing the community energy strategy heavily influenced the FEO framework, which would have seen the private sector subsidize the FEO's planned $1 million plus budget for at least the initial years until the FEO could develop alternative revenue streams. Apparently, only Suncor Foundation from Alberta has contributed $75,000 toward the FEO. I agree with Ron that we need more town staff focused on community-based emissions reduction, at least until the FEO is up to speed. Next slide, please. I hope we can agree that the home energy retrofit program is the project that will likely give us the most significant results in terms of emissions reduction. I will focus my comments on that program. Given that we're 2 years or more away from an implementing entity ready to start actually retrofitting residences, I would suggest that we could give that program a good head start by encouraging early adopters to move ahead with retrofits. Such a Head Start program would also educate the broader public on emissions, how retrofits can reduce emissions, save on energy bills, and make homes more comfortable. This information would also encourage homebuyers to demand energy efficiency in new and existing homes. Activity number 2 would support the Head Start, and activities 3 and 4 would also support the initiative and were specified in the community energy strategy to be complete by 2022 or 2023. With these Head Start activities, when the implementing entity is ready to go, hopefully by 2025 or 2026, we would not be starting from scratch. And a brief digression for the benefit of Councillor Elgar, who asked a question about building codes for new homes. The National Building Code model, updated on a 5-year cycle, will start to incorporate energy efficiency goals in 2025, but not very aggressively. It won't be until 2030 that we have a National Building Code model that defines a net zero energy ready standard. And such a standard has been in force already in the EU for over 2 years. So we're going to be like 13 years behind the EU. And I would say exclusively because of political reasons. There's no technological reason that we should be behind. I would say it would be appropriate for Oakville Council to advocate to the provincial government that they provide input to the national model that accelerates requirements for energy efficiency. I have heard people say that the Ontario Building Code is progressive because the latest code required an 8% improvement in insulation, et cetera. If we want real progress, we need a building code that addresses operational energy efficiency and emissions with a minimum 50% improvement over current new buildings. So we can't force developers to build really energy efficient houses for the foreseeable future, but we can certainly help existing homeowners to improve their energy efficiency and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions through a sensible retrofit program. We should do the best job on that front as we can. Next slide, please. And here's a great example of developing a home energy retrofit program that helps homeowners and breaks down barriers. The City of Calgary has developed a beautiful template that Oakville could emulate or replicate or do better. It's an online resource that provides great educational information and also provides advice and guidance. But very importantly, they also provide access to low-interest financing, which otherwise is a critical barrier for a large number of residents contemplating a retrofit. Oakville could readily do the same with the benefit of a working model already implemented. There are also community resources that the town could call on to assist in this regard. I've had many people ask me, especially since the heat pump webinar that I took part in a month ago, where do I go for one-stop information and advice on heat pumps? Oakville residents would greatly benefit from such a service. Next slide, please. So the FEO is significantly behind schedule, and excuse me, of the $325,000 in funding raised, the town has contributed $250,000. Lack of private sector funding and the pandemic leave us in a very unfortunate spot. So what is Council's view on how we should proceed? I understand this is a question that can't readily be answered until the FEO workshop, hopefully next month. However, given our climate emergency, should we not immediately budget a suitable amount to enable council and staff to tackle the much-needed catch-up activity in 2023? Kicking this issue up to the region or requiring a post-budget request for funding could introduce many months of delay. Next slide, please. I would observe that previous discussions about community emissions reduction seem to also inevitably include corporate emissions reduction activity. I agree with Ron McKee that the town has done a great job in reducing corporate emissions, but I would remind the taxpayers watching that corporate emissions are only 1.5% of the picture in Oakville. So I think it's appropriate to focus on the resources devoted to community emissions and action, and on the related goals and progress measurements. Am I correct that electric buses and TCFD activities should not be included when discussing community climate action? The key unanswered question is, how many staff do we have devoted specifically to community climate action? As the primary goal given our climate emergency is emissions reduction, what are the emissions reduction goals associated with each of these activities? What is the measurement and reporting framework? And what is the current progress against these goals? I believe there's a progress reporting mechanism for most key staff activities. As time progresses, I would suggest it's also important to measure money spent versus tons of emissions reduced. Is this done already for corporate emissions reduction projects? As I believe CAO Clohessy mentioned that business planning for the retrofit implementing entity is underway in response to Ron McKee's delegation, could staff confirm that the business plan in development will improve on the projection from the feasibility study that showed only a 38% reduction in emissions by 2041 versus a community energy strategy target of 50%? And what is the current status and expected completion date of the business plan? So those questions conclude my delegation.
Oh, and if you could just stay at the podium, Councillor Alger.
Hart, thanks very much. Hart, you mentioned Ontario Building Code. Have you gone to our MPPs in Oakville and Oakville North to discuss this with them? Like, there's a big push right now to build 1.5 million homes in the next 10 years. Have you gone to them to see what they can do to change the building code quickly?
I have not taken up that challenge, but it's a very good suggestion, and I endeavor to do just that.
I think, because like we're going to be building an awful lot of houses in Oakville if we're going to meet the numbers. So what a great way to start.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? So I'm just going to turn to, I don't know if Director Clark wants to assist us. There were a couple key questions that were slightly different than what we heard the other day. I'm wondering if you could answer just a couple of them for us. One was the business plan in terms of timing.
So Oakville Enterprise Corporations is leading the development of that business plan. We are actively working with them on the scope of that. I don't want to make a commitment on their part, though, at this time, but there is active work on it.
Okay, and reflecting back on what we heard a couple days ago, OEC is not only the lead on the retrofit, but we have staff supporting that initiative.
Yes, we do.
Okay, and Hart mentioned the FEO workshop. Can you just confirm when that's scheduled for or anticipated date?
We are looking for dates right now for that. It is planned to be by the end of Q1.
Okay. All right. And just in terms of the request to clarify, and I think we asked this question a couple days ago about staff focused on education within the community. Have you been able to kind of think about that one?
So our education component includes three pieces. There's the promotion, there's the education, and there's the outreach. So for each of the climate action initiatives we're working on, whether it's district energy, planned for the home energy retrofit program, our Oakville Ready program, which is about preparing our residents in the event of an emergency, all of that has an educational component to it. But we work across the three prongs of promotion, education, and outreach. Outreach specifically helps us understand what the community needs are and the feedback that we're getting on that. So for the feasibility study on the home energy retrofit program, for example, did include a fair amount of outreach as well, which supports the education component. So the short answer is yes, there is a focus on education to the community.
Okay. Thank you for that additional information. Thank you, Hart, for continuing to champion and encourage us. We appreciate your dedication to the cause. The next delegate is?
The next delegation is Sandy Johnson and Nick Morrison from Safe Streets Halton, and they are here for virtually.
Let's see.
Good evening.
Good evening, Sandy.
Good evening,
Nick.
Sandy. My name is Sandy Johnson, and I'm here with Nick Morrison, representing Safe Streets Halton. We are a community-based organization focused on the elimination of all traffic-related deaths and serious injuries in Halton region. We are a resource for our council, staff, and businesses and residents. I just want to confirm that the slides are viewable right now.
Just give us a moment. We'll see if we can get those up.
Sure.
maybe more than a moment.
Madam Chair. We all have their slides in eScribe, and we all have a monitor we could display them on.
They've come up now for the audience as well.
All right. All the better.
Sandy, go ahead. We can see your slides now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So just a reminder, my name is Sandy Johnson. I'm here with Nick Morrison representing Safe Streets Halton. If we can go to the next slide, please. We would just like to start by saying that we appreciate that the town strategy from 2019 to last year included supporting opportunities for safe multimodal transportation, including walking, cycling, and transit. And we look forward to working with the council and staff on the development of the upcoming year's strategy, prioritizing the development of safe and convenient, active and public transportation networks will significantly improve economic productivity, generate positive social outcomes, and support environmental sustainability. And this is crucial for our town's future. Next slide, please. The major risk, the major risk that we feel the town may face is investing in counterproductive infrastructure. This is where resources are allocated to projects that undermine or hinder the achievement of the intended goals of other projects. Next slide, please. This risk presents itself in the choices a town can face when trying to address mobility and congestion. A great example of this is shown in the video that we provided. If that could be played, please.
How does adding more lanes cause more traffic? Take a city and a suburb. Between them is a 2-lane road, a bike path, and a train line. Most people commute by bike or train. The 2-lane road is jammed every day, so the city widens it to 4 lanes. The road is no longer jammed. Now Karen and her 50 friends can all take their kids to school by car. Now 100 rail commuters can drive, so they aren't dependent on train schedules. Now 20 cyclists can drive because it's faster. The 4-lane road becomes jammed, so the city widens it to 6 lanes. The road is no longer jammed. Now 20 commuters can drive at a company fuel allowance instead of riding a bike. Now 100 rail commuters can drive, so they aren't dependent on train schedules. Now 50 high school students can drive instead of bike or train because it's faster. Due to lower ridership and revenue, the train line cuts connections. Schedules become infrequent and impractical, so 200 rail commuters switch from train to car. The 6-lane road is jammed every day, so the city widens it to 8 lanes, and so on until you have the Katy freeway. And this is how adding more lanes only causes more traffic.
Thank you. If we could, thank you. So the research has shown time and time again that essentially if you build it, they will come. And typically for roads, after about 2 years or more, congestion returns to pre-widening levels, and no progress is therefore made in actually reducing congestion. The alternative solutions in this case would have been to invest in more transit or bicycle infrastructure and encourage demand to shift in those directions. And that would have allowed the goals of decreasing congestion for everyone to have been met and ultimately make mobility better no matter what mode of transportation you're using. It's a great example of when investing counterproductively often leads to wasted funds. The risk of making counterproductive infrastructure investments can also be seen in decisions that are made around parking, especially when parking is provided at a loss. Parking is often considered one of the worst uses of, for pieces of urban land. It is both economically and environmentally unsustainable. And investment in parking also significantly undermines any investments that are made into transportation, transit infrastructure, because the impact of parking availability on transit usage is twice as significant as the impact of transit access. So that is, the presence of available parking has a greater influence on whether people choose to use public transit or not than the actual accessibility of the transit system itself. just something to keep in mind as Oakville does increase investment into public transportation. Usually, such investment into parking is usually meant to help drivers avoid being frustrated that there's a lack of parking. However, greater and free parking infrastructure increases the number of people who feel that they should or need to drive to a given location, and ultimately increases demand as a result. It also reduces the walkability of that area, further contributing to this cycle. Alternative solutions in that case would be to use centralized parking garages just outside of the walkable area. For example, this would reduce frustration caused by looking for parking without actually adding to the number of parking spots or increasing the square footage of land used for parking. Another option would be to increase safe and pleasant active and public transportation networks in those in-demand locations and to those in-demand locations. And this will reduce the number of people choosing to drive and thus free up parking to those that do wish to drive. Next slide, please. We do actually have a good example of this here in Oakville, and that is a potential missed opportunity that was for Block 1 in the Lakeshore West redevelopment. So from Mississauga Street to East Street, in an effort to limit tree and property impacts, council decided against multi-use paths or bike lanes for that Block 1. And we have heard as a result of this, from other Safe Street volunteers that due to the lack of more bike-friendly changes in Bronte, many people who could have chosen to bike into the area are discouraged from doing so, even though they did want to. As a result, Bronte continues to be a challenging experience for cyclists, particularly those with children due to fast-driving cars and crowded sidewalks. Thus, those that are not quite close enough to walk into Bronte area choose to drive into the area. This leads to an increased road congestion and parking demand in the area and parking frustration in the area. Next slide, please.
So at budget committee meetings this year, there's been some conversation around how we increase transit ridership. Through our research, we see a number of things that influence the success of a public transit system. Few of these are frequency and reliability, customer comfort, route organization, and fare structuring. Next slide, please. Regarding reliability and frequency, having buses reliably show up at short intervals like 10 or 15 minutes can improve ridership. This way, riders don't need to consult route schedules and plan their days around them. A good example of an existing route like that would be Route 14 and 14A. On portions where these routes intersect, they run at 15-minute intervals, but this is only during rush hour, and after 8 p.m., the route runs hourly until midnight. Despite its connections to downtown, the Kerr, and Bronte villages. This harms the perceived reliability of the service, where potential riders won't take transit for all day, evening, or late night trips for fear of being stranded when trying to get home. Next slide. Another route similar to Route 14 is Route 5, which crosses east-west across Dundas Street into Burlington. And in widening Dundas Street, the pedestrian experience was harmed, which can also decrease potential transit ridership. In terms of route organization, this route stops in the uptown core before heading south to Oakville Go, meaning that those who live in the town's west end but work or shop in Winston Park need to wait for a transfer. Next slide. A grid system that represents a more natural path of travel with short transfer times helps to make a transit system more attractive. Following similar improvements, Burlington Transit saw a strong increase in ridership after only 1 year in 2019 and is now at 85% pre-pandemic ridership levels. Next slide. So in regards to the Oakville transit fare structure, looking at the fare structures of adjacent municipalities, we noticed that each transit system offers a monthly or weekly loyalty pass, whereas Oakville does not. After a certain number of trips, the rest of the time period is free. So for an adult in Burlington, that would be 38 trips a month or $104. Mississauga, that would be 12 rides or $37 a week. And by comparison, Oakville's monthly pass for adults is $139, which is only worth it after 42 rides. This high upfront cost is prohibitive to lower income families and increases the amount of friction for riders since they have to do math to make the monthly pass investment feel worth it. Next slide. The committee has been discussing attracting youth and seniors to transit. Burlington Transit has recently seen great success in its free transit for seniors program. In June 2019, this program came online as a pilot, resulting in an overall increase of 41% in senior ridership after only 1 year. In regards to attracting youth, committee may be interested in the high school transit orientation program in Kingston, Ontario. This ongoing program resulted in 600,000 trips taken by high school students in its first year, up significantly from 30,000. Next slide, please. So going through this quickly, there's designs for streets being funded that may not be up to date with safety standards. An example would be the next phase of the 6th Line project. Design safety standards have improved since 2013, and these designs do not recognize that. Next slide. So we see that there is a lack of median pedestrian islands in this design that create a safe zone for the elderly, wheelchair users, and those recovering from physical injury. Next slide. There's a lack of protected intersections that make it safer for cyclists, improve sightlines for drivers, and increase pedestrian safety. And here's a photo of one that's under construction in Burlington. Next slide. There is insufficient bike lane protection. This photograph was taken this past weekend on 6th Line facing north. The infrastructure resembles informal curb parking and tells drivers that you shouldn't park here, but you are able to do so, even though it's actually illegal to do so in Halton region. All of these improvements are in the Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, which the Transportation Master Plan makes reference to. Next slide. So finally, we would like to remind the community that delaying investment or investing counterproductively into active and public transportation can have negative consequences in several ways, such as increased costs, decreased health in residents, climate change impacts, poorer economic and financial stability, and a less accessible town for all. And next slide. Thank you for listening to our deputation. Look forward to any questions you may have now or in the future. And if there are any questions we do not have the answer to, we'd be more than happy to follow up after.
Thank you, Nick and Sandy. And you have got one question so far from Councillor Adams.
Thanks so much for the delegation, and thank you very much for bringing the information about the Kingston project forward with respect to training high school students, particularly starting at the grade 9 point. I wondered if you could describe that in any further detail for the rest of committee. I looked at what you provided to me electronically, and it seems like a fantastic project that I'll ask our staff about as well. But I wonder if you could provide a little bit more detail for the rest of committee.
Yeah, I can provide that. So just quick surface level, I believe they started this program in 2018. And what they end up doing is they actually give free transit passes to grade 9 students. And it's not that they just give the transit passes, they actually have the school board teach the students a few things about transit. They actually go onto the bus, have an experience and say, okay, this is how you get on. This is the bus driver, speak with the bus driver. This is how you tap your Presto card. This is what you need to do when you get off on your stop. And they also talk about the economic, social, health, and environmental benefits for taking transit. And they're also taught transit etiquette. And they saw that now 10% of the ridership actually comes from high schoolers. And I think one interesting point to mention, just in terms of finding efficiencies if Oakville were to go in this direction, Burlington is also showing interest in this program. So offering possible synergies with the school board between both of you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. I'm sure if I can ask our staff if they could provide any further information about what kind of programs we do with outreach to high school, that would be helpful.
Commissioner, are you going to take this one?
Thank you, through Madam Chair. Currently, we do not have any promotional educational program with our high school students. However, for the presentation, which is very welcome in terms of the frequency, the promotion with the fare structure, that's all going to be reviewed in our 2023 capital budget request of our 5-year plan. So in our 5-year plan, we will be looking at all the variety of components that was brought by the delegation, including promotion and education.
So the idea in the Kingston model is it's almost like when kindergartners start riding the school bus for the first time, they do learn how to ride the school bus programs. It's almost the same thing, but with grade 9s doing how to ride the city bus. Is that a program that we could consider? And if we were, how would we best ask for it?
Certainly, I think that is a program that we could consider. I think the best way to go through that is also through our transportation master plan process. We have a promotion educational program that we are very active, whether it's in active transportation, safe streets, promoting transit. I think the overall mobility, promotion, and education should be grouped together as opposed to doing independent just about the bus or just about something else. So I think similar to what the delegation has indicated, the overall safe street aspect of how to take the bus is something we could incorporate into our overall community engagement for mobility. And I think that would be a great action item that will come out of our transportation master plan that we're conducting this year as well.
Okay, and so for the delegations as well as the rest of us, when will the transportation master plan program come forward for us to check to see how that gets incorporated?
The transportation master plan is initiating this year through, it is within our 2023 capital budget. The consultation for transportation master plan will occur throughout 2023. The plan is planned to be completed at the end of 2024. Further, I just want to indicate we are doing a 5-year service planning, 5-year transit planning program as well in a study that will complement the transportation master plan. That will also have public engagement opportunities for a variety to increase promotion and education. So both studies will come out with action plans that we could take a look at through the future budget.
So this will be starting this spring into the fall that we'd be seeing the transportation master planning consultations?
That's correct, throughout 2023.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Councillor McNeice.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Nick and Sandy, for your delegation. You covered many topics that I think were very helpful to all of us, and thank you for bringing up the Kingston example. I'm not sure if you shared the video of that with everyone, but if you could, that would be great to have the FCM presentation about that, because I think it's a real partnership with the school boards, and I think that's what's kind of the magic behind that example. I just wanted to note in your presentation on the Lakeshore Road reconstruction, transportation can correct me if I'm wrong, but no decisions have been made on a cycle path or a multi-use trail there. We'll be going back out to consultation this year. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but so we'd love your continued involvement and input on that. So there's still opportunities there. Thanks again for your delegation.
Thank you, Councillor McNeice. Councillor Shi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you, Nick and Sandy, for your wonderful presentation. I have one question for Nick. That's on page 12 about the Burlington senior, that chart. So we can see there is a free ride after the pilot that will be increased significantly for the ridership. So do you have any data that the Burlington, the transit lose money for that or increase the cost?
In terms of that, we actually were going to look for approximately how much increased funding they actually receive from the gas tax. So where we might see some loss in terms of fare box revenue, you can actually have that money be made up through funding from the federal and provincial government, because we actually get money for ridership and not for as in addition to the amount of fare revenue that we generate. That we did not end up getting that information though, so that is something that I could send to you afterwards.
Okay, thank you. So that's, from my understanding, so that's funding from federal government for that pilot program?
No, this is just in general for transits. The municipalities get funding from the upper level governments based off of how many riders they have on their transit systems.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shi. Any other questions from committee or council? I have a couple, thank you. Commissioner, if I could just ask you a couple of additional questions. Thanks very much for being available. The delegates talked about sixth line and concerns with the design on sixth line. Don't need an answer tonight, but given that they're referencing safety and some additional ways that pedestrians could cross perhaps in a better way, are those suggestions ones you could report back to council on?
Certainly, Madam Chair, we will look at the suggestion by the delegation and take a look at our design and report back to council.
And my other question is just around the transportation master plan. So our two delegates clearly should be at every meeting because they're incredibly thoughtful and well-informed. But in terms of how it's going to be conducted and the process, there are multiple organizations in the town that are advocates for cycling, for different approaches. And one of the common concerns they have is being alert and aware of the opportunity to convey their concern about, as an example, the ability to go from Cornwall Road north up Trafalgar regularly. So do we have a strategy around how we're going to get these individuals an opportunity to bring some thoughtful suggestions forward, just as Nick and Sandy have?
Through Madam Chair, the Transportation Master Plan will have a robust public engagement strategy that we just recently awarded the contract, so we will be producing an overall strategy. In that strategy, we identify all the variety of stakeholders that's not limited to not only individuals, BIAs, businesses, the public, interested stakeholders that represent certain, I'll say, interest groups. That will be all part of our overall consultation engagement strategy. So everyone will have input on how to enhance the overall mobility for the town through the Transportation Master Plan.
Okay, thanks very much. And my last comment is just to follow on from Councillor Adams' comments about Kingston. So Kingston's approach was to start with, like, from a cohort. We start at grade 9. In year 2, it went 9, 10. In year 3, it went 9, 10, 11, until they built up to covering all the high school ages. In terms, I know that you've written a report on our request about the bus pilot, et cetera, and it's just been posted tonight. Are there additional comments that we perhaps should be aware of before deliberations on Tuesday in regards to how the Kingston opportunity or the Burlington, and is there an approach to finding sort of the best alternative to get started in Oakville, not necessarily jump all the way to one or the other?
Through Madam Chair, we will take back the delegation's suggestion and certainly what you just mentioned to look at some, I'll say, the phasing options of from the 0 free to completely free, and take a look at perhaps other opportunity to phase in the free youth or free seniors perspective from tonight's meeting, and we'll bring that before during the delegation meeting with some comments.
Okay, I recognize that time is tight. I just, from just a general understanding of, can the approach be adjusted, and could a later start of something in a pilot give you time to apply some of that learning? Should we be considering that when we do deliberations? And I see CEO Closey is up. Sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair, I was going to suggest that I think this is one of the pilot projects that you were suggesting that could potentially be funded out of tax stabilization. So that would give us then the opportunity to take the information away that we've heard tonight and that we have heard through other sources as well, and put together some options to bring back to you within this year to look at how we could use the tax stabilization. If you decide to move forward with a pilot, on the youth and the seniors, and that's our next step to do, so that you wouldn't have to have all the details of how we could roll it out for deliberations, but you'd look for a report to come back from us on how we would then roll it out.
Thank you for clarifying that. Commissioner, thanks very much. CEO Closey, thank you. And I see Mayor Burton has his hand up.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. My questions are for the CAO and the Commissioner. I don't know who to, why don't I pose the question and you can decide who catches the ball. I plan to ask at deliberation if you would prefer to approach this through the Kingston model versus what I proposed at the first or second budget meeting of a pilot of free transit for all youth and all seniors. I believe my proposal has widespread support on council, and I'm not sure I really want to pare it down to such a narrow target, but I'd be happy to, and I will go consult with my colleague, the mayor of Kingston, to see what his advice is. But it would be useful to have an informed discussion about, you know, to add this to the information we have for the discussion on the 21st. And I thank you for anything you can do to assist us with that.
Through you, Madam Chair. Mayor Burton, I would suggest that we would like to take the two options away and bring them back to you in a fairly short period of time, because I know you want to move forward. If you want to move forward with the pilot project, then you need those answers quickly. Deliberations is next week, so I don't think that's a reasonable enough time for it to come back with an opinion on which is the best process to go forward on. That's why I had suggested that the tax stabilization funding available to us, then we can sort that out as we report back to you.
Okay, thank you. My experience for 16 or 17 years has, or more than 16 years anyway, has been that half measures don't seem to work very often. And that is what prompted me to make the let's try it all suggestion for a year and see where we get. Anyway, thank you very much for the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Councillor Nanda.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So I was wondering if we could ask, including in this report, I know there are some cities, I don't know if Kingston is one of them, where, for example, in Calgary, high school students don't have any bus transportation from the school boards, whereas we do have bus transportation from school boards. So it might be helpful in this report to show that if we want to do this free ridership or fares for kids, the difference between having cities that have transportation provided by school boards as opposed not to. I think that might be helpful in us seeing that if not, the percentage of kids who would require this in Oakville, and as you said, if we can use tax stabilization, it's something that I think would get more support from us.
Certainly, through Madam Chair, we will include that as part of the report back.
And Councillor McNeese.
Through you, Madam Chair, I know I heard you mention the Burlington model. I think that was, I believe what was recently approved just last week was this off-peak hours for youth, evenings and weekends. I believe it was because of the busing issue that there's sort of some duplication. So I agree with Councillor Nanda that if we could, you know, hopefully that information's readily available and we could have some idea if that was their intention in Burlington. And then I sort of like that idea of the tax stabilization gives us some time to look into it deeper, talk to the school boards, especially with youth. So thank you.
And I'm looking around and you've answered all the questions so far. Thanks very much. Nick and Sandy, we thank you very much for your delegation and for your thoughtful ideas. We're going to move to the next delegation now.
Next delegation is Tony DeZenza from the Oakville Wind Orchestra.
There he is. He was
Good evening,
almost
Madam Chair and Madam Chair through the council. Or through Madam Chair to the council. And through Madam Chair, I also ask for any forgiveness in slights or missteps on decorum this evening, as this is the Oakville Wind Orchestra's first delegation in its 156 years to the Budget Committee. We are very excited to be here. And through Madam Chair, I would also like to thank Nick and Sandy as the previous presenters. It strikes me that a free transit program for high school students is exactly how I became involved in concert bands in the first place, taking the 6:30 bus from my home in River Oaks to White Oak Secondary. And if not for the availability of that 6:30 bus and the frequent transit of the 19 system at the time, I would not be here presenting before you today. So I echo their strong recommendations. And as a Queens alumnus as well, a little bit of bias in that coming from Kingston. But nevertheless, we will move onward. Next slide, please. The ask this evening is for a fee waiver as part of this year's budget delegation for the Oakville Wind Orchestra for our performances at the Bronte Heritage Park and the Butterfly Gazebo this summer. Next slide. The summer series is a staple of Bronte's waterfront. We perform to over 2,400 audience members every year, providing very accessible performances. Individuals with high special needs, seniors, mobility issues are all able to access at this wonderful location and enjoy an evening of free music, and that free music allows us to provide for those of lower socioeconomic benefit as well. In addition to the free music that is provided every Tuesday night, we also use these opportunities to give back to our community even further than that, in conjunction with our audiences through an annual food drive that we do every year. And it's not simply that give back that works, but our presence at Bronte Heritage Park proves a draw every year. And through that draw of new audiences and new individuals to the Bronte area, increased participation in businesses in Bronte around the park, helping to drive the economic activity of the area. Next slide, please. We value the value that we provide to the community at over $50,000. Our typical ticket sales are at about $20 a concert, and providing that for free to audiences is providing close to that $50,000 mark. But in addition to that, as we just conveyed the value to our communities and to the businesses in the area, are all part of the value proposition that we provide in asking for this delegation of funds. Next slide, please. And it is a value that we can tend to continue to grow. There's a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion in our membership and in our programming, including summer series tunes that you will hear performed by Japanese-Canadian composer Kate Nishimura, 2S LGBTQ composer Stephen Reinecke, and works featuring Indigenous artists such as Raven the Trickster, which is composed in conjunction with Canadian composer Robert Buckley and Squamish First Nations composer Bob Barker. Our audiences will continue to grow through evidences through our partnered media coverage, as we were featured last year nationally on CBC's Nationals The Moment and saw audience increases thereafter. And these audience increases are being proven. Versus like-for-like growth pre-pandemic, we are seeing a 10% increase in our overall attendance at our first two concerts of the season and expect to see that continue, only further increasing the value that we are continuing to provide. Next slide. It costs the Oakville Wind Orchestra $10.50 for every minute we play that in Bronte Heritage Park, and this is broken down between our insurance costs, the cost to rent our vans and transportation, costs to pay our technicians, costs to SOCAN, taxes, and $5.60 of this is directly fees that we pay back to the town. Our ask is fairly straightforward, and for the over $50,000 in value that we provide in our services and free concerts, which we are very proud to do, and we are asking for that fee waiver on the Bronte Gazebo. And with that, through you, Madam Councilor, or Madam Chair, I will open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm going to look for questions from the committee. And I'm not seeing any from councilors and abroad. None. Anthony, I do have one question, and that I guess it's tied. Have you connected with your BIA that's close to you about possible collaboration and/or sponsorships?
We have connected with the BIA and are in processes of both sponsorships and collaborations that are going to help us reduce some of those other elements on the program, specifically but in addition to simply the cost of this concert, there are costs for operating and training for these concerts, including our weekly rehearsals and such. That is what we typically use some of the sponsorship for. So we have sponsorship monies that are planned to come in that are helping us to offset other costs that we have not specifically discussed as part of this proposal.
Thank you for that. I see Councillor McNeese's hand is up.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you, Anthony, for your delegation. It was certainly nice having the concert going on throughout the summer. Could I just get clarification from staff? Do we have, I know we have some existing fee waiver programs. Do we already have something that would qualify for this, or is it sort of like a new direct ask? And in addition, I did see in next week's budget meeting that I believe we're talking about expanding it, if I'm not mistaken. So if we don't have the answer right now, we could talk about it next week, but I just wanted some clarity on that. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, the organization actually gets a 30% reduction fee waiver already. What I did want to highlight is that we are reviewing the special events strategy this year, and we will be looking specifically at the fee waiver program. As well, we also have a request in the budget for the community activation grant, and that might also be an opportunity for eligibility should council approve that particular program request.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anthony, thanks very much for coming out. Thanks for always entertaining the Bronte crowd, and have a good evening.
It was a pleasure, Madam Chair. Thank you. And through you, thank you to the council.
Madam Clerk, our next delegation.
Our next delegation is Olivia Nito and Ayman Numar from the Pink Project, and they're both virtual.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I do believe we have a slideshow. I'm not sure if that's being shared right now.
Just give us 1 second to get it up for you, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you so much.
There we go. We can see your slides.
Perfect. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing us to delegate in tonight's meeting. We are the Pink Project, and we're very excited to be here to pitch our initiative to you, what we've done so far and what we look to do in Oakville and beyond. So welcome and thank you so much. Next slide, please. So I think a great way to kind of start our presentation off is to just introduce ourselves as people before we get into our cause, what we're doing. Next slide, please. So my name is Olivia Neto. I am a second-year industrial design student at Carleton University, and I will let Iman introduce herself.
Absolutely. Hello, I'm Iman Namar. I'm a second-year McMaster student majoring in biology, and Olivia and I essentially started this project in our final year of high school and have since extended it to multiple municipalities and hopefully Oakville in the future as well. Next slide, please.
So the first big question that we'll be addressing tonight is why care? So when we're talking about these really huge kind of societal issues, we have to always start with the fundamentals of why should we address this issue? What is it about this issue that is so pertinent in societies across Canada and across the world, not just in Oakville or in Burlington? So next slide, please. When we look at these numbers and these statistics as it relates to period poverty and menstrual equity, it's clear to see that this is an issue that needs more attention than it's been getting in the past. So $6,000 is a monumental amount to be spending by any person, let alone those who are living paycheck to paycheck, those already struggling financially. And we have to also bear in mind when it comes to periods, this is not a luxury, it's a necessity, right? We as women and as those who menstruate cannot control periods. It's not like we can quote unquote hold it. So these are products that we do have to buy, and to be spending that much on a necessity is obviously going to put a dent in anyone's budget. And again, missing school, missing work, that's 70%, 66%, that's well over half. And to be missing things that you have to be doing kind of on a daily basis because of, again, something you can't control is a problem, objectively speaking. Next slide, please. So a thought we kind of like to leave people with when we're giving these presentations or to make a comment on is that when you enter any public restroom, as it is, you don't have to pay for toilet paper, you don't have to pay for soap, nor do you have to pay for paper towels. And those are all things that I think many of us take for granted when we do go into those restrooms. And we can always argue that those are just as much of a quote unquote luxury as pads and tampons are. Next slide, please.
Absolutely. So Olivia touched a little bit on period poverty. Now, period poverty is real. It's real in Burlington, it's real in Oakville, it's real across Canada, regardless of whether or not we see it. So although the pink tax was eliminated by the government, $6,000, as Olivia mentioned, is still a lot of money for anyone, especially those who are financially struggling. Alongside this is the extra taboo and shame that completely encircles this topic. So the embarrassment that you feel about walking to the office in your high school to get a tampon, or, having to miss school or work because you're embarrassed. That kind of stuff is what we ultimately want to break down and work towards having open conversations and menstrual equity for all. Next slide, please.
So our mission as a project, when we started out this initiative, we started it at late 2020, so we've been at it for a little bit now. Next slide, please. We really, really wanted to boil it down to the basics, and we decided to go with two main pillars: to spread the word and to deliver products, or in essence, to educate and to distribute. Next slide, please. So that's what we really started working with at the very, very beginning, right when we sat down for the very first meeting, just myself and Iman. We were saying, okay, how do we start this distribution, right? How do we go from nothing to having these products readily available in public washrooms? And I'll let Iman kind of take on the initial budget that we put together.
Yeah, absolutely. So that middle picture right there, that is the budget. So we budgeted for about $1,900, and we added $50 just for marketing fees. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we were able to get this budget, this grant from the Community Support Fund team. We were approved for $1,950. Our pilot project went on for about 6 months, and we spent $877. So, looking at those numbers, we didn't even need the full grant for the project that we started. And this really emphasizes how much of a cost-friendly application this is to many communities. And so this is just a few pictures of the two of us going to Walmart and grabbing the supplies and all of that. So next slide, please.
So thank you so much, Iman. So up on the screen here, we decided to put the initial partners that we had when it came to our pilot. So it does say final partners for clarity's sake. That was the final partner by the end of our pilot program, which ended a few months ago. So we decided to partner primarily with places that would reach kind of the target demographic we're looking to kind of get in contact with. So the Burlington Public Library, we do have to give a special thanks to them because they were the ones that really helped us in the beginning. They were the first partner, and they were the one that, in essence, allowed us to obtain that grant that we applied for, because we did need a partner location to apply for the grant. So we got it in all 7 Burlington Public Library washrooms, as well as the local Value Village in Burlington on Fairview Street, the District 3 Halton Police Station, as well as a local restaurant in Burlington downtown, for the purpose of foot traffic and really getting the word out across the city and in the community, because we knew lots of locals went there, and to broadcast across social media. Next slide, please. That would be a great place to start. So up on the screen here, we decided to show these stations as they looked throughout the remainder of our pilot. So we set up a small TV sort of table, that little like wooden table, with the poster, QR code to our website, as well as, of course, the products and a few business cards. And these stations were standardized across all locations, all participating locations. And the color scheme we chose was really meant to make it kind of a standout in any washroom, because we look in these washrooms and they're all very neutral tones. So that bright pink, the bright orange, They're really meant to kind of bring out that, I guess you could say, the zing of having that like extra exclamation points sort of area in the washroom, which was kind of fun. Next slide, please. So I'll let Iman kind of touch on these.
Yeah, absolutely. So the total amount of washrooms, just to backtrack on that slide, was 13 washrooms total for our pilot program. We did get a lot of news coverage. So the Toronto Star, the Burlington Gazette, we were on podcasts, Your TV for Halton. So lots of different media coverage, lots of people approaching us and just seeing what we're all about. And this definitely helped us spread the word. Next slide, please. Ultimately, from spreading the word, we got to a lot of people, and the people is the people that we essentially really want to hear about, the people going into the washrooms, the locals. And just, these are a couple of examples of the appreciation and the support that we received from locals. So yeah, next slide, please. And I'll let Olivia take over this one.
Absolutely. So yeah, again, just to kind of touch on that publicity as well, we were fortunate enough to have our mayor's support, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Marianne Mead Ward. She's been a fantastic support throughout the great part of our project. So this is just a couple posts to show that. Next slide, please. And now the big question is, I guess, what now, right? So where do we go from here? Next slide. And the final big question of the night is, how much is it going to cost me? Because that's what a lot of people want to know, because, this is all great, this is all fine, but how much will it be? These are the numbers that we have come up with after having run a pilot, after having had this program approved by the City of Burlington as a permanent service. We created a small table here to show what the maintenance cost will be with a dispenser in a washroom and just an open box in a washroom, as well as the setup, or you could say the startup cost of installing that. I will make a note that we calculated the expenses for an open box with retail prices, right? So this is definitely not the wholesale discount prices that, say, a municipality would be working with. We did get the dispenser numbers from Milton. So they helped us out and they sent along their the data that they collected from installing dispensers in their washrooms. They refill those 3 times a year. And so the overall cost actually ends up being less than having that box and having to replenish it a little more frequently. So we'll leave those up just for a second on the screen so you all can take a look at it. But that is ultimately the numbers we're working with. Again, we cannot stress this enough. It's less than a round off error. So we're not entirely familiar, of course, with the amount of facilities where this would be installed in Oakville, but we can take those numbers and sort of estimate based on that. Next slide, please. And with that, we will conclude our presentation. We thank you very, very much for taking the time and for being here and present this evening. And we are more than happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You've got lots of interest. So I'm going to go with Councillor Elgar first.
Thank you very much for coming and presenting tonight. I'm just trying to figure out, Burlington is doing it now, that they've got this program in place. So we could go to Burlington and get accurate numbers of what the annual cost is of what they have in their budget. You're not aware of it yourself, I guess, correct?
So essentially, it is implemented in Burlington across 90 washrooms and 19 different recreational facilities. We put up the cost per bathroom just because the numbers are different depending on the municipality. Burlington essentially started with a 1-year pilot program just to see what the numbers would look like. And so they invested, I believe it was $15,000 to purchase 60,000 pads and tampons for the course of the year. I don't know currently if those numbers have been changed based off of the data that they received, but those were their starting numbers.
But the program is still in place, correct? In Burlington?
Correct.
So that makes it very easy for us to go and get what the annual cost is. So they did it, their public washrooms. It doesn't include the school boards or anything. This was like the rec centers, any public places that the Burlington has.
Exactly.
Appreciate
and
that.
I'll chime in here as well, just to add something on. We have been in contact with a couple of representatives at the City of Oakville, and they do have a copy of the report that was sent to Burlington Council. So we'd be more than happy to send another copy of that along, should it be the case. But that outlines kind of the options that were created with our team at the City of Burlington in terms of, if we do it with dispensers, it'll be this much, with products and bins, it'll be this much. And so there's a nice little options document as well.
No, I will be asking staff to get a report from Burlington. I think it'll be very easy to do. So thank you for bringing this to our attention. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Councillor Nanda.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. First, I wanted to say congratulations. This is an incredible initiative. I have young daughters, and I would be very proud if they had brought up some type of initiative like this. You're very young, so I know that you'll be very, very successful. And as you said, that this is a need. I do echo what my councillor colleague said. I was also looking to have staff report back. And if this is something that could be implemented, I think it would be wonderful for us to kind of see as well. He did also touch on, I was going to say as well, if you had maybe reached out to the school boards to see if this is an initiative that they could do in the schools as well. We're seeing that it is actually starting younger and younger in elementary schools as well as secondary schools. So I think to be able to provide something in those facilities as well would be very beneficial for us. My comment's the same. Congratulations, and if staff could maybe report back on this, I'd love to see it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nanda. I'm just looking up because before the meeting, I actually had a chat with Commissioner Bell. Perhaps you could come to the podium and just tell us what you do know, and then we'll go to Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our community development team and the OPL have been working very closely together in monitoring what's been happening with this initiative, both in Burlington and Mississauga. So we do have quite a bit of information already. What is currently in place is at the OPL, they have a short-term pilot at all of their branches to accept donations so that they in turn can distribute to individuals that are in need. What we would like to propose, and from an action standpoint, is we would like to look at the possibility of 2 or 3 pilot locations for 23. This would not impact the bottom line for the proposed 2023 budget, but we think this would be a great opportunity to take a look at need and also analyze the data from both Burlington and Mississauga, as they have slightly different models, both in terms of the actual distribution and machines that they have installed. So there's a lot of information that we are already looking at. We're very excited about this initiative. We think it's fabulous.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Adams?
Thanks very much. I appreciate the extra information our staff had. Could you give a little bit more information about what Burlington currently has? So I think I heard you say they've got 90 locations, but they're not using the dispensers. They're using, I'll describe it, the basket method?
That's
What are they
correct.
using?
So last we heard from Burlington, again, because these things are changing and evolving as we speak. But they are across 90 washrooms in 19 different recreational facilities. That being said, we are currently in contact with the Halton region to try and kind of create, I guess you could say, create a branch of our initiative as it relates to the region itself, as it relates to the education, the HDSB. So that is something that we currently have ongoing. We can't speak on that as of now because there are no concrete developments quite yet, but that is something that we are exploring. We have a couple of avenues, and this is one of them. So today we're here to kind of show you what we've done in Burlington as a municipality and ask ourselves, how can we then mirror that or create something very similar given the Oakville community and given the facilities in Oakville. But yes, that's correct. They do have the boxes.
And did I hear you say that Milton is using dispensers, or they're looking at dispensers?
They are using dispensers. So what was really great about Milton was that we actually reached out to them alongside Halton Hills and Oakville, as well as Burlington. So we got all of the municipalities we sent one blast of emails to everyone. And when Milton got back to us, they actually informed us that they had implemented it on their own. And they took that extra step to invest in those dispensers and installing the dispensers. So then they reported back to us with those numbers and what it was like for them to have that startup installation.
So if I understood your slide, it was about, for the Milton dispensers, it was about $400 setup fee, and then it was something in the order of $180 $150 or something a year to operate it. And the Burlington model was more like $40 or $50 to set it up, and something in the order of $150 or something per location to supply it.
Not quite. So in Milton's case, they do have the dispensers that have a slightly higher, I guess, installation fee or startup cost, but they only have to replenish those dispensers 3 times a year for $25 each time per bathroom. As opposed to Burlington, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're still collecting data from and trying to understand how many times each bathroom needs to be replenished with that box scenario. So it's not quite clear how much it is per year. Again, that's information we can definitely ask for. But as of now, we're still in that data collection phase of that program in Burlington.
And I think you said a dollar figure that Burlington had for its first year. Was it 15,000?
Yes, that's correct. That was in the form that we've also sent to the people we've been in touch with at Oakville as well.
Okay, and so, but that's a pilot that may only have covered part of the overall cost, and they may have gone back for more, or?
So that was the proposition to implement a 1-year pilot, which got unanimously approved. So that was last year. So when that ended, there was another budget meeting and another motion to implement it permanently, which also got unanimously approved. I'm not aware of changes in the budgets that they've added to the form, but we can definitely get in touch with them and ask and see if there are any new developments in terms of data that they've uncovered.
Okay, and the 15,000, the pilot, was that for all, did that cover the 90 locations or bathrooms, 90 bathrooms and 19 facilities? Was that covered by the 15,000 pilot, or was there more? Did it start with a smaller number?
Yeah, so that covered about 60,000 pads and tampons, and this was sort of the number that was installed in those 90 washrooms over the course of 12 months.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm just trying to get kind of a scale of the dollar figures that are involved, given Oakville's 20% or something bigger than Burlington. Thanks very much. And yes, I'd look forward to our staff giving us a more detailed ballpark in terms of what it would cost.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just want to say that my wife and daughters must have been just so used to not having these products available in public washrooms that they carried them themselves or something, because it's a surprise to me that we don't provide them along with paper towels and toilet paper and so on. And at the deliberations, I'm going to be suggesting that we ought to be, we don't need a pilot. We just need to complete the full amount of service that we ought to have in a public washroom. And so I'll be looking to staff to give us, an estimate for what it'll take to implement this necessity. And I'm just saying now, I don't need a pilot to know that we need to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and I saw some nods around the room. That doesn't give you a confirmation yet, but you obviously have got lots of interest. Councillor Adams, is there another question?
No, sorry, it's not a question. It's more of a comment, because spitballing this number looks like it's about 20,000 in the Oakville context. If we were equivalent to the Burlington pilot in terms of what we were doing. And so we're not talking about a giant thing here.
But it's giant for those that need it, so.
Yeah, it's giant for, it's a giant issue, but it's,
it's not a lot
dollar
of money.
figures, we're not talking about a big deal.
We both have women at home who aren't going to be nice to us unless we deal with this.
Well, we're glad something convinces you.
I'm just surprised.
Yeah. Ladies, thanks very, very much. Great night's work, and we thank you for taking the time, and have a good reading week, because I think it's next week.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Madam Clerk, I believe we now open the floor to delegates.
I have 2 delegates who have registered. The next delegation is Mervyn Russell.
Is Mervyn still here? Okay. All right.
So our next delegation and last delegation is Pierre Sebaga.
Pierre, we look forward to your comments.
Good evening, Madam Chair, councillors, and Mayor Burton. I just want to thank Nancy and John, as well as the staff of the town, for producing the operating capital budget. I do understand how difficult it is preparing such a budget in these times. However, I do have a few questions I wish I can enlighten me and maybe educate me as to certain matters. But before I ask the questions, I just want to thank again, applaud the young ladies who did the Pink Project. My daughter's been always complaining about why hasn't this been something provided by the government. It's a necessity, and I'm glad they've brought this up. With respect to the specific operating budget questions I have, it's the emergency services, page 65. I'm just curious, under personnel services and benefits, it stated that there was an amount of approximately 160,000 added to provide lieu time in recognition of Truth and Reconciliation Day, which takes place September 30th. My understanding that this is a federal matter, and the provinces were left to decide whether or not this would have been a statutory holiday. With respect to Ontario, I don't think it has been implemented. However, I'm just curious as to how this happened to be initiated in the, I guess it must have been the fire department negotiation. Am I correct? That's one of my questions.
Pierre, I just want to remind you, it isn't really a question and answer format.
Oh,
I
sure.
will try to
No
get
problem.
you some
Yes,
answers
at a later time.
as we can, but it's not meant to be a question and answer format.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Next one's in regards to municipal enforcement, page 153 to 154. Specifically, the Animal Society. I've noticed there's a considerable increase in the budget of approximately 357,900. Obviously, costs have gone up. There's only, I believe the town has a service level agreement with the Humane Society, the Oakville and Milton Humane Society. Just wondering when that will expire. At one point in time, the city of Burlington had done a project to determine whether it should have been done in-house versus being provided externally. I went to the city of Burlington, and I noticed that their cost is relatively lower than the town of Oakville, the service that's provided by the Oakville and Milton Humane Society. It's just a future consideration when the agreement is coming to an end that the town should look outside of the Humane Society and whether or not it can be provided at a more reasonable cost to the public. Next is in regards to, interesting is the tax stabilization reserve use. To be honest, I just wanted clarification as to what the funds are to be used for. Originally, I thought that the funds were for emergency purpose, yes, for unforeseen major emergency expenditures and to provide a source of working capital for the town. I tried to accumulate all the various amounts which this tax stabilization has been used to reduce the operating budget. Wonder if possible that staff can present to council the amount of this tax stabilization that's being used in the various programs within the town. And just clarify, I've heard a lot of money is being spent on items which I don't think it's an emergency as well. I'm not too sure if it really is valid for a capital project because it seems more like an operating cost. Secondly, on page 164, the administrative executive area, this gives highlight to the the amounts which are transferred from the tax stabilization fund to their operating budget. And in it, it's for specific studies, one of which was the facility maintenance review. I tried to look up that review online, but I wasn't able to. But more importantly, there will be future projects or reviews done in 2024 and 2025. I wish that could be more of a public document so we can see what the results of the review was and where the funds can be reduced in future operating budgets. And one more, it's in regards to, I know I was cautioned not to repeat myself in regards to the DC, or pardon me, the capital budgets, so I won't do that. The last one, I just want to bring to your attention that I know there are priorities which has to be considered by the town, but I'm just wondering if staff can highlight why the internal audit function wasn't considered as part of the 2023 budget. Obviously, I think I know the answer, but I just want to clarify to make sure what the answer is from staff. And if possible, in future years, if the internal audit function, which I believe is a valuable service to the town, can be looked at. So I want to thank everyone for your time and appreciate all the work that council has been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. I'm just going to look to see if there's any questions from the committee or council. Oh, Councillor Adams.
I don't have a question on the delegation. I just wondered if our staff could reiterate what they've told us previously about some of those issues, in particular the internal auditor position.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Took the words right out of my mouth.
Through you, Madam Chair, our internal audit function, there is money in the budget for outsourcing of internal audit function. Part of the KPMG study recommended that we look at having that service provided as a contract, and we have used those funds in past for specific audits. We will be reporting back this year, though, on the best approach going forward. But I do want to assure everyone there are funds in our budget for that.
Thank you, Nancy. There's a couple other questions here that I think we could probably just clarify. So in terms of, there's a report that has been posted to eScribe, I believe, tonight, which is available to the public. Am I got that correct? It's up. It's there. Thank you. Excuse me. I believe it speaks to some of the efficiencies that you were asking about, and the committee was. I also understand that the tax stabilization information, what we have spent and how we've allocated is in that report. I'm seeing a nods. Okay. All right, great. And can you just clarify, because the delegate used the phrase unforeseen emergency. My understanding is that it can be used for one-time pilot type initiatives that we may or may not have to take into the levy, but I'm not the accountant or the finance person, so if one of you could just clarify, that would be great.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. So we use it for unforeseen emergencies, but we also use it as a funding source for pilot programs, things that are not necessarily ongoing. We do not use it for ongoing expenses, but it is a way of funding a pilot to test the waters.
Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, would you, for the benefit of the committee and the public, also give us a brief description of I'll call it the health of our tax stabilization fund, perhaps with a comparison or two? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, our tax stabilization fund is very healthy. I think we have said in past, GFOA recommends about 17% of your gross expenditures. We're sitting at about 26%. So we use it very prudently. It is there for emergencies. We are using it this year to fund some of the COVID impacts, the temporary ones in transit. It allows us to not add that burden to the taxpayer for something that's temporary in nature.
Mayor Burton, is that what you were looking for?
That was perfect.
Thank you. Um, uh, Just a couple of the other questions that popped up. So the Humane Society Service Agreement, I recall seeing that just in the last quarter. I don't want to pin myself down to a month, but I believe that that has been renewed, and it is not just for Oakville. Could you just clarify that?
That's correct. There was a report that came from municipal enforcement on the renewal of that contract, and in that review, we had looked at a number of options.
Thank you very much. I just want to touch on Truth and Reconciliation, a very important day, something that speaks to equity and inclusion, which is near and dear to all of us as we walk the path of reconciliation with our Indigenous partners. Can you just clarify that it is a statutory holiday that we've chosen to take for the town?
So through you, Madam Chair, our collective agreement language required us to examine this in keeping with our diversity and inclusion initiatives and some of the other municipalities. We have decided to recognize the day across the organization, and it is incorporated in our budget.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that is, Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, the question is to staff, and I don't expect an answer tonight, but when we come back. I've gone through the 320-page report, which is really, really well detailed. I appreciate it. I put it in Excel, the way I'll always try to work. And I tried netting, I got the net levy, which is $238,101,500. But when I put in the details from all the 30 tabs, I was missing $30,153,000. So then I went back to the page 45 and I found that number. But I cannot find the details that make up the $30,153,000 anywhere that show that it's like split out the way all the other tabs are for fire services. And it's one of the third largest amount of money we have in our whole budget. Fire's 43.2. Park Transit's 33.2 roughly, but this one is 30.2 ballpark. But can we get that provided to council for deliberations?
Certainly through you, Madam Chair. Tab 28 has the details for our corporate revenue and expenses.
Well, if you look at but if I look at tab 28, which I've got here, I can't find the breakout at all of all the different deals. Maybe I'm missing something, but I can't find the 30,153,000. But maybe you can help me. That page to me, it doesn't jump off at all.
We can bring that back for you next week. It really is the net of the expenditures of the 83 million. And then if you look at all the revenue sources that are netted against it, excluding taxation, that's how you come to that 30,153,000 number. Those expenses are non-program related expenses. It would be debt charges. It would be the bulk of it is our capital levy, 42 million of that 83 million. So it's those types of expenses that sit in our corporate section because they're not related to a specific program.
Okay, that'd be good if you could bring it back because I don't see the numbers at all. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions from the committee, and I'm just going to poll the audience. You are allowed to be a walk-on delegate if there is any delegate that hasn't had a chance to speak. Madam Clerk, it looks like we have no other delegates. All right. So I just want to just make sure, is there any new business that the committee has prior to meeting on Tuesday, February 21st for deliberations? We do, as a committee, have some heavy reading. We have 85 pages of feedback from all the great questions you had from the earlier budget meetings. Happy long weekend. So we will reconvene at 9:30 on February 21st for budget deliberations. And I have given staff a heads up that we may have a series of questions before we get to the final deliberations. And Mayor Burton.
Madam Chair, I wonder if council would be considerate enough to forward questions before the meeting so that staff can have a better chance to be prepared with answers.
So I would concur, Mayor Burton, and it is my intent as chair to make sure that I reach out to everyone and that we'd ask that they do get the information over to staff, preferably before Tuesday morning. We did meet this afternoon and we gave them some information to be prepared for. But if there are additional questions, that would be appropriate. All right.
We need a mover for the motion.
So I need a mover to receive the delegations, the presentations from the delegates regarding the 2023 operating and capital budget. Do I have a mover? Mayor Burton. All those in favor from the committee? Okay, so moved and passed. And so with that, we will, I need a mover, I guess, to adjourn the meeting. Councillor Adams, all those in favor? Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. We'll see you on Tuesday at 9:30.